Hey, everybody, welcome. We'll get started in just a second here. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jessica Coonan. I'm the Hudson Estuary Resilience Specialist with New York Sea Grant, located in Kingston, New York, in the lovely Hudson Valley. And I will be moderating today's webinar with some technical assistance from Karen and Nancy down in Long Island. And in case you don't know, New York Sea Grant is a cooperative program of SUNY, Cornell, and NOAA, and it's part of a national network of 34 university-based programs. Through extension, research, and education, New York Sea Grant promotes environmental sustainability, coastal community economic vitality, and citizen awareness and understanding about New York's marine and Great Lakes resources. So one of my focus areas is community resilience under climate change, and a big part of that is supporting equitable outcomes in planning and decision-making. So about a year ago, we released an environmental justice mapping tools guide that brings together 22 different online tools to help communities investigate and define their context through the lens of environmental justice. And these tools can also help visualize some of the disparities that we might be seeing on the ground using this free publicly available data. So this webinar series is in response to feedback that we received that it would be helpful to take a deeper dive into some of these tools. So today's webinar is the second in a series of 3 that's taking place this fall. The tools that we chose to highlight focus specifically on combining environmental and climate data alongside demographic information. Today, I'm very excited to learn about the Neighborhoods at Risk tool. And last month, we learned about environmental justice and the EJ Screen tool from our representatives at EPA Region 2. And that webinar was recorded and it's been posted to the New York Sea Grant YouTube page under a new playlist called Environmental Justice. And we'll put the link in the chat for that. So our speakers gave a wonderful overview of environmental justice and the concept of disproportionate impacts that we're going to be building on today, thinking about climate change. So I recommend you check that out if you haven't already. And then next month, our final webinar, we're going to learn about recent updates to our regional sea level rise mapper that also displays data from the Social Vulnerability Index. So I'll be in touch with links to register for that as well. And before I introduce our speakers, I have a few housekeeping items. We'll spend the first 45 minutes or so learning about Neighborhoods at Risk tool through a live demo, and then we'll have time for questions. We'll take like a 5-minute break, and then the last half hour will be a fun, like hands-on exercise. So highly recommend sticking around for that just to get a better sense of how to use the tool. We ask that you please submit questions to our speakers throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box. And you can open this by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of the webinar window. The chat feature is also enabled for you to comment and interact with each other during the presentation. Please try to remember to put your questions in that Q&A box. It just makes it a little easier for us to keep track of it and gives you a better chance for your question getting asked. So we are recording today's webinar and we're going to post it to that YouTube page as soon as we can under that new playlist. And then finally, we're going to put a link to an evaluation survey in the chat at the end, and we ask that you please fill that out because it helps us with our programming. And so with that, I am very excited to introduce you to our guest speakers today. Patty Hernandez is co-founder and executive director of Headwaters Economics. Patty has 18 years of experience in researching economic development, building partnerships, and developing technology solutions to help communities plan and adapt to a changing world. And Scott Story is the team's lead GIS analyst, database manager, and data engineer. He coordinates and updates the data behind all Headwaters economics tools and data visualizations. So Patty and Scott, thank you so much for being here. Take it away.
Thanks, Jessica, for the opportunity. Hi, everyone. I know it's Friday afternoon, East Coast time, right after lunch. So I'm going to try to keep it really lively and fun today. I'm super grateful that all of you took the time to join and learn a little bit about this tool, Neighborhoods at Risk, that Headwaters Economics is making available for you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me just a second to get that going. Awesome. Okay, so super quick introduction to the organization. Headwaters Economics is a nonprofit. We are Montana based, but we work all over the country. Our work is kind of split between two buckets. We have some community assistance programs that are focused on helping communities reduce risks from flooding and wildfires. We have been around 16, almost 17 years, and we've worked with more than 100 communities across the country. The other half of our work is on research and policy work and tools. And all of that tends to be in response to requests that we get from our community partners. And one of those requests was to develop Neighborhoods at Risk. So I'm just going to dive right into it. So from our homepage, you can click on the Tools button to find Neighborhoods at Risk. And I'm going to go ahead and click on Map at Risk Neighborhoods. And the very first thing that I want to do actually is just play this super quick, it's kind of a fun little video on what Neighborhoods at Risk is all about. So let me get that going for us. It's only 3 minutes long.
Neighborhoods at Risk helps people access data on climate exposure, climate projections, and at-risk populations. It was designed to meet community planning needs. It's free to use and available for every community and county in the country. So let's run through an example to show what you can do with Neighborhoods at Risk, focusing on Lake Charles, Louisiana. Lake Charles is a working class, mid-sized community, about 80,000 people. And in 2020, they were hit by Hurricane Laura. So it's one of the biggest storms ever to hit Louisiana, followed only 6 weeks later by Hurricane Delta. And due to those two storms, thousands of residents were displaced. We'll use Neighborhoods at Risk to identify the parts of Lake Charles that could be prioritized for future mitigation work to reduce flood risk as the community rebuilds. Neighborhoods at Risk automatically shows in blue the census tracts that have greater vulnerability to climate change. There's a summary sentence at the top of the map that describes the number of census tracts that have greater vulnerabilities than the community median. And your top 3 vulnerabilities are shown on the left. So for example, Lake Charles has more housing units that are rentals, more people of color and Hispanics, and more families in poverty than other US communities. The map is completely customizable. So the characteristics on the left side of your screen are actually map filters. And as you set them to higher values, you'll see only those census tracts that meet your criteria. For example, here I'm asking the map to show me only those census tracts where more than 30% of families live in poverty. And here I'm asking the map to show me those census tracts that also have a high probability of flooding during hurricanes. Let's say that I'm trying to prioritize mitigation work in neighborhoods that have fewer options for evacuation, and I want to see on the map where there are large numbers of households with no access to a vehicle. I can add that characteristic and then further customize my map. The table on the right-hand side of your screen shows the combined characteristics of any highlighted census tracts. You can hover your mouse over an individual census tract to see its characteristics. And then importantly, you can download what you're seeing in your web browser in a nicely formatted report. Now that you have your map, data, and report showing where there's both greater exposure and more socioeconomic vulnerability, You can share that information with your elected officials and others in your community that are involved in prioritizing mitigation work.
Okay, so I want to actually take you through just a little bit more slowly some of the features that were shared in that video. So I'm going to do that for the next 8 minutes or so. And then I'm going to pass the baton to my colleague, Scott Story, who's going to take you in deeper to go through some of the more advanced features in the tool. So the first thing I'm going to do is in this search bar, I'm going to type in Yonkers, New York, partly just because I love that name. I'm not actually very familiar with the community, but here we go. I'm going to learn a lot here in Neighborhoods at Risk. So we're into the opening view of the tool for Yonkers, New York. And one of the requests we had from the communities that we worked with to design this tool was they wanted something interesting, some insight right off the bat. So the opening view shows you in blue the census tracts that have greater vulnerability to climate change. So those are the ones highlighted in blue, and I'll tell you how we go about figuring that. So the sentence up at the top shows you that summary sentence. There are 16 census tracts within Yonkers where vulnerabilities to climate change are greater than the community median, according to these top 3 kind of demographic and socioeconomic characteristics that are shown on the left side of the screen here. So Scott will tell you how we do this, but at this point, all you need to know is that we've done some work under the hood to show you the characteristics for your community that are relevant for your community. If I was to type in the community where I live in Helena, I would get a different set of characteristics on the left. We don't have a lot of people with language proficiency difficulties, for example, in my town in Montana. So certainly this would not be one of my relevant vulnerabilities, people who don't speak English well. And Scott will tell you more about how we surface which vulnerabilities, which characteristics are relevant for your community. Like I described in the video, and it's so weird to see yourself in a video, but the next thing that we walked through in the video was how to customize the map. So I'm going to play around with these filters on the left side of the screen. The first thing I'm going to do is just set all of my map filters, kind of null them out. I'm going to set them all to none. And when I click to that none button, the map responds by saying, okay, well, we're starting from scratch. Here's all the census tracts within the community of Yonkers. So at this point, I can say, well, how about I just see those census tracts where more than, I'll set it to about half, where more than half of the housing units are rentals. So that's now true of every individual census tract that's highlighted in blue. More than half of the housing units within each of those census tracts are rentals. And let's say that I'm working on a project focusing on the impacts of extreme heat in the summertime on renters. And I want to be able to say, okay, well, these are where there are high densities of renters. Show me also where there's a lot of impervious surface, since that's certainly can contribute to more extreme heat. So now I've added a criteria. I've set the area of impervious surface also to greater than 50%. And at this point, the census tracts that are highlighted meet both of those criteria. So these are neighborhoods within Yonkers that both have a lot of renters and a lot of area of impervious surface. And then I can come and look on the right-hand side of my screen at the characteristics of those 14 census tracts that I've highlighted. So for example, we see that there's about 62,000 people that live within those 14 census tracts. I can also hover my mouse over an individual census tract to see just the characteristics of that one location. And then finally, the last thing that I'm just going to show you in this overview pass is that you can download a PDF containing socioeconomic data by clicking on this download report button. So if I do that over here on the right, I'm going to get a PDF report for all, it's going to be the combined characteristics of those 14 census tracts that are highlighted in blue in the map. If I click on an individual census tract, I can get that same report, but with data just for that individual census tract. So the next thing that I'm going to show you, still keeping things high level, is this about page that you can access from this little menu on the top right. So as you're using the tool, if you have questions or if you're just trying to get oriented or share this with a colleague, this about page can be really handy. It has some really high-level descriptions of what the tool is all about, a couple of kind of overview videos, some frequently asked questions. And I wanted to, so I'm going to scroll here just through the page so you get a sense of, what we've put on this about page, who the tool was created for, some, very high level instructions about what you can do, and data sources, and a flyer, kind of a, I think it's a front and back page PDF that you can download. So just to round things out before I pass the baton to Scott, I wanted to share with you just the history of, where this tool came from, why we ended up developing it. So Headwaters Economics was working with a set of communities in the Great Lakes and Mid-Atlantic. Buffalo, New York was one of our original community partners, and we collaboratively designed neighborhoods at risk together. And so we went through lots of iterations, made lots of improvements in response to what the city staff, we were working with resilience coordinators and also land use planners within those communities. And they gave us a lot of great constructive criticism. We then got some funding from NOAA and also from some charitable foundations to build out the tool so that at this point it's available nationally for any community or county in the United States. And we're publishing it for free so that anybody can use it. And in fact, since I think it was 2018, we've been tracking the web analytics, and we know that close to 30,000 people have come on and used the tool from every state in the US. And just in the last year, we've had a 10-fold increase in use. I think partly because we've been doing a lot of these workshops, and then partly because people are passing it around. It's awesome that people are discovering that it's free and they can use it, in their community. The last thing I'll share with you super quickly is just a quick story from Dearborn, Michigan, which was one of our early partners in figuring out how to, make neighborhoods at risk useful to communities. So shortly after we developed neighborhoods at risk with Dearborn, Michigan as a partner, and actually it could be fun just for reference, I'll show you where Dearborn, Michigan is. So if I zoom out here, you'll see that Dearborn is just to the west of Detroit. And Dearborn was launching a really wonderful public health initiative back when we were working with them. And they were able to use neighborhoods at risk to help prioritize where they would make certain services available that were part of that big public health initiative. It was called Healthy Dearborn. And the program was really cool. It had free exercise and nutrition classes that they hosted at neighborhood elementary schools. And they were able to, along with working with their community, they were able to use neighborhoods at risk to prioritize certain neighborhoods for those public health services. So that's just one quick example. Interestingly, not a climate resilience example directly, although certainly indirectly, it is. So at this point, I'm going to pass the baton to Scott, and I'll stop screen sharing, Scott, because I imagine you want to start. And then we'll have questions right after Scott wraps up.
Great, thanks, Patty. Hopefully people are seeing my screen now. Patty, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see it?
Not yet.
Okay, just 1 second then. How about now?
Yep, you're
Great.
good.
Okay, thanks, Patty. I'm gonna make one little shift here a second and move my script to a different screen so I can make sure not to miss anything. So as Patty said, I'm gonna take you through a little more in-depth tour or give you some of the behind the scenes of how neighborhoods at risk is working, because we've seen questions pop up throughout time as we've watched people use the tool. So I'm going to start with a different community. I'm going to start with Rochester, New York. Turns out there's quite a few Rochesters. So there's Rochester, New York. And as Patty said, when you first get a result for your community, the things you're going to see, I'm going to take you through a little tour of what you're going to see. You're going to see right away that 27 census tracts have been selected. And I'll explain a little bit more about why those were selected by default here in just a second. You're going to see that your filters here in the upper left-hand corner, the vulnerability metrics, there's 3 showing, and I'll tell you why there are 3 and why they were selected. You're going to see your climate exposure metrics. I'm going to shrink my browser here a little bit so you can see all of the climate exposure metrics on the left. Maybe I better leave it at about 90%. You're going to see that these are called pills, these little ovals that are on the map I'll explain what those do in a second. You're going to see that you have some results for your 27 tracts here in the window in the upper right-hand corner. And then you're going to notice that you're on the Explore Neighborhoods tab, but that there is another tab called Climate Projections, and I'll show you I'll explain a little bit about what's going on there in just a second. So first of all, the vulnerability criteria. Why are there 27 census tracts currently selected, and what is that based on? Well, if you click on the See More button here, you're going to see that there are more than just 3 vulnerability characteristics, and Patty already touched on this. These are the top ranking characteristics for this particular geography. And the way that we arrived at these 3 is every community in the United States was ranked against every other community in terms of the percent of households with no car, for example. So if I was to populate to the right here, the percent rank, these 3 criteria would be in the 90% range. I actually checked Rochester earlier today, and these 3 vulnerability criteria ranked among the 90th to 99th percentile in the entire United States. Whereas people of color and people over age 65 ranked much lower. So out of the 9 possible vulnerability characteristics, these 3 rose to the top for Rochester. So I just wanted to explain, that's why if you want to see the other ones, you can simply turn them on as Patty showed you. Okay, so let's go back to the original 3. The filters are set for you automatically. They're set to, by default, the community median. So you have 3 options here for how to set the filters. You can turn them all off, as Patty did, and I'll do that in a second. But by default, they're set to the community median. So you're seeing the tracts in Rochester that are above the the community median that we have calculated for you. If you want to adjust one of those, let's set all the filters to none. There's several ways to do that. You can click none, or let me reload the page and it will bring the medians back, the community medians back again. You can reset all the filters by clicking on this pill. They're all set to 0. Let's reload one more time. You can also get rid of a particular filter. You can say, I'm not really interested in the families in poverty filter. Notice some tracts came back on. I don't know if you could see that. I'm also not interested in the number of homes that are rentals. Let's get rid of that. More tracts came back. Now I only have one filter set. I have the households with no car filter applied. If you want to change it, if you want to make it more conservative, let's find places where there are even more households. The percentage of households with no cars is even higher. In this case, 42%. Now I'm really honing in on particular parts of Rochester. This slider is a little sensitive. If you want to change it a percentage point at a time, once it's highlighted like this, you can actually use your arrow keys. So I'm using my arrow keys to slide this 1 percentage point at a time. I'm adding more and more tracks as I lower that threshold. Again, you can click the See More button and you can change. If you don't want the top 3 criteria, let's first, oops, I took away all the criteria. Let's say you want, for some particular project, you're really interested in where children are. So you can select the percentage of tracts with children under 5 and only use that criteria. Or let's do a more practical example. What if you want to know where there are more elderly people, people over 65, and we're looking for places that are sort of heat islands. So we can find all the places in Rochester where there is a lack of tree canopy and there is a higher percentage of more elderly people. In this case, I noticed that Rochester actually has a lower percentage, for example, than many Montana communities of people over 65. So this might not be the best criteria. But again, we could change that. What if we want to know where families in poverty and heat islands intersect? We can easily do that. The histograms that you can see here, let me ratchet up my the magnification a little bit. The histograms here are showing you the distribution of all the data for families in poverty. So for all the tracts that are on screen inside or intersecting with the Rochester boundary, you're seeing in gray the non-selected tracts and in blue the currently selected tracts. So as we play with that slider, you can see that some of the selected tracts will start dropping off and we're left with just a handful of little blue slivers here, as opposed to if we turn the filter all the way down, we still have the area lacking tree canopy applied. Eventually, the bars turn completely blue because all tracts are selected. I'm just going to look at my notes really quick. I want to emphasize, let me reload Rochester and zoom out a little bit. I want to emphasize that the filters work in an and combination. So they're not or filters, they are and filters. So all the tracks you're seeing are a result of all the filters being applied at once. You can take away, if you just want to use the vulnerability filters, you can turn all of the climate exposure filters to 0, which they are at by default. And you could just use one filter to find where are the predominant places where households with no cars exist, right? So that's how the filters work. I just wanted to mention that they are and filters. The pills, I showed you how the pills can be used to remove filters as well. So these ovals at the top are called pills, and they're just an easy way to subtract a filter like that. Notice that as I change the filter, my combined results are changing. So if you watch the total population figure here, it's at 71,000 in the selected tracts, and now I took away a filter and I have a different number. So the combined results reflect the currently selected tracts. this is I think Patty may have mentioned this, but this is a new feature. If you want the information about a particular tract, you can pin that tract by simply clicking on it. And when I clicked on it, notice that it's staying still. It's holding the values for that tract. The values here are different from all of the selected tracts. And we've added this download a report for that particular tract button. So if you want to see the information about just that tract, you can click the download button. And your browser will alert you that it has downloaded the PDF. And Patty, can you see the report here? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. So this is a report for that tract, which would happen to be tract 85 in Monroe County. But let's go back and let me show you how you can download a report for all the selected tracts. So that was one tract, but if I want a report for all the selected tracts, and I'm going to go ahead and just reset the view so that we get the default community median view. I can click download report. Notice it's telling me for 27 selected locations. That matches the sentence up here. We'll get our report download alert. And it's often helpful. Somebody taught me this in one of our most recent sessions. It's often helpful to tell your PDF to be presented in 2-page view. And I can also hide the little thumbnail image. And then why don't I shrink this just a hair so you can see. So if you put it in 2-page view, you can see the entire report. And actually, I'm going to go ahead, I have this at a different point in the schedule, but I'm just going to go ahead and walk you through. No, I'll come back to this in a second. We'll come back to the report in just a second and go through its anatomy. Some other things I wanted to show you. Yes, the climate projections tab. We haven't even talked about that yet. So if we click on the climate projections tab, we're on the Explore Neighborhoods tab, but if we click on climate projections, now we're going to see the other half of the equation, which is what's the climate vulnerability for this place look like? Now notice it's the climate vulnerability for the entire, for all of Rochester, New York, not for the selected tracts. It is for the entire community. This data comes from the ACIS climate tool hosted by Cornell. It's for those of you that know a little bit about climate models, we're using what are called the LOCA downscaled models, and we're using the 32 model average. So this is a very kind of coarse view, but it's some of the most well-accepted downscaled climate science available. It will tell you what you can expect in a sentence at top. What can Rochester expect? They can expect to experience a 193% increase in extremely hot days and a 16% increase in days with heavy precipitation in the next 25 years. Can we change the time scale? Sure, we'll let you change the time range. If you want to go out to 2050, let's go out to 2051, a nice even 30 years. So you can go out 30 years. And the sentence will reflect the change. The graphs are updated. You can also change emission scenarios. We all know, because we've been listening to the talk in Scotland lately, that we're probably on track for more warming than we really want. But if we can get our ducks in a row and change things around, maybe we can shoot for a lower emission scenario like RCP 4.5. And so if you want to see the result, these are two of the most commonly talked about emission scenarios. If you want to change to this lower emission scenario, you can, and the graphs will be updated. Let's go back to the high emission scenario. You can also change in the two heat and precipitation windows. You can change the threshold. Let's say we want to know, we're set at what are the number of days that will be expected to be above 95 degrees, but we can change that to 100-degree days. The average temperature graph is not adjustable, but and likewise with precipitation, we can look at really extreme precipitation days. Notice with precipitation, we know this from climate models, there's a lot less known about the future for precipitation. Temperature is pretty straightforward what's going to happen. Precipitation is a little bit less easy to pin down. So that's the climate projection tab. I'm going to take you back to the main tool. I wanted to take you to one more community and show you what happens when we have one tract. There are quite a few places, and I chose Addison, New York. There are quite a few places where there will only be one track, and you're going to get a little bit different view. So notice we don't have any histograms, right? Because there are no tracks to histogram. There are no sliders. We get the information for Addison, and we can back out and potentially, if we knew what county Addison was in, which I should have looked up. And a strategy for a place like this, I'll just leave it at this for now, and maybe we can come back to this if you have more questions. A strategy, and I'm sure some of you know what county Addison's in. Oh, there we go, Steuben County. So we could change and look up Steuben County, if I can spell it right. Steuben County, New York. And maybe looking at Steuben County will give us, there's Addison down, you can't see it because my tooltip is covering it, but there's Addison down in southern Steuben County. So maybe if you're in a place with a single track, maybe you're going to need to, and the reason we can't get it, we're limited to information presented from the American Community Survey at the track level. That's as far down as we go. And so maybe to get information about Steuben and put it in, or Addison and put it in context, you're going to need to switch to a county view and really download the report for that entire county. So I just wanted to tell you that's one strategy if you have a place. And there may even be in the West where we are, there's even counties that may have one track. The tracks get bigger and bigger because they're meant to capture a certain number of a certain population. So let's, I'm going to jump into the report anatomy. Let's go back to Rochester. Oh, I already have this report open actually. So here's our downloaded PDF. And you have a title page that tells you that you selected Rochester, New York. Your comparison location is the United States by default. There's actually an opportunity to change that, I think. So we'll go back and look at that in a second. We added this map. This is a new feature after we created neighborhoods at risk. We decided to add this map because we needed to display somehow spatially the tracks that were selected. So you can see the same picture that you had in the application, right? Blue selected tracks, gray, other census tracts. A little bit about neighborhoods at risk here. Then we get into the table of contents. As Patty said, we worked with a number of communities in the Great Lakes and Midwest for developing neighborhoods at risk. And these pages were selected from our other system, which is called the Economic Profile System. So they were a custom selection by the participating cities that those cities thought were relevant to this topic. So they're hyperlinked, you can jump to a particular page, but we'll just go through it quickly page by page. This summary page shows you all 9 vulnerability metrics, compares the selected tracks to the entire United States. And then this bar chart's a little bit confusing, but think of it this way. It's the percent difference between the two values. And the larger the bar, or the greater the magnitude of difference between the selected tracks and your benchmark, which is the United States at large. So you can see by looking at the biggest bars right away, you can see that families in poverty and households with no car are more different than the United States than any of the other metrics. If the bars are to the right, then the difference is in favor, well, quote unquote, in favor of the selected tracks, meaning that percentage is bigger. So families in poverty, 42% in these selected tracks in Rochester versus 9.5% in the US at large. So that's the summary page. It's a quick glance at what are the vulnerability metrics I might want to pay attention to if I'm comparing my selected area to the United States at large. If we go to the next page, this is a great opportunity. Oh, you know what it's doing? It's wrapping my pages here a little bit. Following the data page will be a page that we call the study guide. And it will tell you a little bit about what we measure on that page. So maybe I should take this back. I'm going to take this back to one-page view. So here was the data page, and here's a little bit about what we measure on that page. It tells you why it's important. We do this in all of our economic profile system reports as well. And that's information that's been, or is a culmination of our economic experience, socioeconomic experience over the years. Let me zoom in on this report page a little bit. Families in poverty. This is a typical display of our data. It's Rochester, which is the community you selected, then a column for the selected tracts, and then a column for your comparison community or comparison geography, which is the United States. We often give you the raw values, the absolute values, and then put them in terms of percentages as well. And then when possible, we showed the change in percentage points between the 2010 5-year ACS data, which is actually, so that's data that includes 2006 to 2010, and the 2019 5-year ACS data, which is from 2015 to 2019, 2016 to 2019. ACS are estimates, the data are estimates. So if you see a red figure like this, it means it has low reliability. It had a very large margin of error. If it's orange, it has medium reliability. If it's black, it has a coefficient of variation less than 10 to 12%. And then often we show charts for our data as well. So in this case, we've charted families in poverty for you in the 3 compared areas. Yep. Oh, right. In this particular chart, we show you both all families in poverty and single mother families. So let's jump to the next page, and I'm probably not going to go through every single one of these in this for the sake of time, because we want to get to a question and answer period here shortly. But you'll see that there's a page on there's the study guide that goes with the previous page, families in poverty. Here's each one of these pages is basically corresponds to one of the vulnerability metrics. So here's a page about rental and mobile homes and the accompanying study guide. Here is a page about people of color and Hispanics, race and ethnicity. Again, explainer page, our study guide, language proficiency. You get the idea. At the bottom of the report, go all the way down to the bottom. Here's where I wanted to go. We have a lit cited page. So you would have seen footnotes throughout, especially on the study guides where we referenced literature. So if you need to cite the same folks we're citing, you have the ability to do that. That's the Neighborhoods at Risk report in a nutshell. And I'm just going to look back at my looking at my time. I'm pretty much on time, and I'm looking back to see if there's anything critical that I missed. I think that's pretty much it, and that brings us almost where we've almost caught up to where we intended to be. So Patty, I think it's a good time to for me to stop sharing and turn it back over to you all. See if I can manage to do that. There we go.
Thanks, Scott. So yeah, I've seen questions streaming in. Jessica, have you been looking at those? You want to help facilitate some Q&A? We're ready with answers.
Okay. Yes, thanks everyone for your questions. And also thanks for letting us know it's Steuben County. I was frantically Googling that because it's where that was in New York. So first question, is it feasible to download metadata that contains every tract in a specific state?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So something that has been requested, and we are currently, figuring out how we might accomplish it, is actually packaging up a shapefile download for all of the census tracts, so that in addition to downloading the PDF report, you could download, potentially a spreadsheet. The really common request is for an actual GIS file of all the census tracts within the community with all of the characteristics that are used in the tool. So we haven't published that feature yet, but I appreciate the ask, and it's something we're considering and trying to figure out.
Excellent. Next question, what is meant by community? For example, in New York City, they have 5 counties within one city and different neighborhoods within each county.
Yeah, so what we've included in neighborhoods at risk is all counties and what the census calls census designated places, which mostly are incorporated jurisdictions. There are some unincorporated communities that have lobbied the census for inclusion, and we use the census as the standard. So whatever they include in their annual update of census designated places, those are the boundaries that we serve up in neighborhoods at risk. And Scott, there's what, how many tens of thousands of those, you know, quote unquote census designated places?
Over 29,000 nationwide.
Okay.
Okay, great. I'm going to follow this census thread for a minute here.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to overlay or otherwise tease out municipality wards within census tracts?
At this point, census tracts is the finest scale that we've gone down to. And there is some rationale behind that. We're relying all of those demographic and socioeconomic characteristics that are available in the tool are from the 5-year American Community Survey, the latest release. And of course, that's a survey, and the fewer people that are represented, the more error there is in the estimates. So already down at the census tract level, and census tracts, the census tries to draw those boundaries to capture on average about 4,000, 4,500 people. And already with that small of a sample, there's quite a bit of error in the estimates. So if, for example, we went down to the census block level, for many of the characteristics that are in neighborhoods at risk, the data would be almost useless. It would just be so inaccurate that you wouldn't be able to say anything meaningful about, yes, this place has more renters or more families in poverty than this other place, because the margins of error are just so big. So that's the constraint that unfortunately we're working under that keeps us at that kind of gross geographic level census tracts.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's really important to think about kind of the resolution. I know the EJ screen tool goes down to block groups, but then as Patty was saying, it might be less accurate. And then if you get down to the ward level, even more so, you might need to supplement it with some local information if you have it besides the census.
Yes, and Jessica, that's such a great point, because you know, hopefully neighborhoods at risk can be a conversation starter and can be one of a set of considerations when prioritizing resources, but it can only accomplish so much. And the, you know, the local information at some point is, you know, where you need to be to actually make decisions.
Great. And then can you just reiterate one more time? Someone asked, is this info from the 2010 census? If so, when do you think it'll be updated to the 2019? I know that's a little confusing with the American Community Survey and those 5-year blocks, but
yeah, no, it's such a good question. So the the data we're relying on are not from the decennial census. They are from this annual released every single December, and we, process it and have it as fast as we can reflected in all of our tools, including neighborhoods at risk. They're from the annual release of the American Community Survey, which is different from our decennial census, still published by the Census Bureau, but a different survey. And when they release it every December, and we grab those data, scrub them, and have them reflected in our tools, what we grab are called 5-year estimates. And so Scott touched on this. When we grab in a month from now the latest release of the American Community Survey, it will show the characteristics for a location, for a census tract, for example, the characteristics over the time period 2016, 17, 18, 19, and 20. So it's going to be over that 5-year period, what do they know about the share of families below the poverty line, or the share of folks that have difficulty speaking English. So that's what those data are, is those 5-year estimates, and we do process them and get them into neighborhoods at risk every single year when the census releases their latest release.
Excellent. So just reiterating for this one question, all that information on the socioeconomic stuff comes from the census, and yes, it is available for all cities and towns in the US. So moving on to some of the climate indicators, you used the 500-year floodplain as a metric. Was there a specific reason to choose the 500-year instead of the 30-year, which is sometimes seen in the literature, or even the 100-year?
Yeah, we went through a lot of dialogue about that with the community partners that helped us figure out which characteristics to include. Interestingly, a lot of the folks that use neighborhoods at risk are using it to bolster grant applications. And in, for example, this latest round of BRIC FEMA funding, so that's their Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, they recommend that people consider impacts of the 500-year flood event. So, we can certainly consider more frequent, smaller flood events, but the community partners that were involved in helping us curate the list of characteristics to include advocated for the 500-year flood.
Great, thank you. Let's see. So another kind of follow-up question similar to that, I think you might have just covered this, but some of the data seems tied to historical weather patterns. How can this tool be used for new weather patterns, such as heavy rain, which has become a major issue in New York City?
Yeah, this was one of the biggest head scratchers that we had when developing neighborhoods at risk. We actually worked with a large group of climate scientists from the NOAA-RISA network, from GLISA, the Great Lakes Network, from SCIP, the South Central, from the Mid-Atlantic, MARISA network, and all of them told us the same thing, which was, so the communities said, we want, the climate change shown to us at the census tract level. And the climate scientists responded by saying, we cannot tell you from one census tract to the next how climate change will differ. We have no idea at that fine of a spatial scale. So the compromise that we came to with all of these collaborators was, well, using downscaled climate models, we do know something about at the community level or at the county level what the climate forecasts are expected to be. And that's why on that second tab, climate projections, we settled on, well, at least what we can do is help people understand what the climate is expected to be in 25, 50, 100 years. You can set that slider bar for your community. So what that means is whatever climate exposure you're seeing today, it's particularly for heat, it's expected to be more severe, and that other tab can put that into context. One thing about that climate projections tab is that as you spend a little time poking and dinking around with it, you'll see that the communities asked us to include quite a bit of narrative information about why that particular metric matters, like what it relates to. And so this is just an aside, but if you're on that climate projections tab, you'll see that there's some good context on there that's good fodder for learning or inclusion in, say, grant proposals.
Yes, I think the reports are so great. And on the climate projections tab, I love how you have put things into language and explained why everything is important. I think people can really learn a lot just from reading through these reports. So that's great. So the questions are rolling in, so I'm going to keep going to the hour if that's okay.
Yep, sounds good.
And I'm loving this one. Which community has used this tool to the best of its ability, and what was the resulting action taken?
Okay, so I told you the Dearborn example. I got to hear stories from that original cohort of the 18 communities that we worked with. Those included, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, lots of communities kind of in the middle part of the country. I'm not going to judge which one did something cooler than the other. I'll say two things. One is that when you publish a tool for free that doesn't require login, password, or payment, we're putting it out there into the universe, knowing that it's been hit 30,000 times in the past few years, and nobody's obligated to come back and tell us awesome stories about the way that they're using the tool. So a lot of our knowledge is limited to, that original cohort or the communities that we work on the ground with on flood or wildfire risk. And I can tell you that the range of stories that we've heard have been very diverse. So we didn't anticipate, but it turns out a lot of communities are using the tool for public outreach. So it's easy enough to work with that they actually have it up in public meetings and use it to explain why they're prioritizing certain work in certain parts of their city. So that was one unanticipated use. And then we obviously designed it with resilience coordinators and planners to be a climate focused tool. But the Dearborn example was somebody using it for a public health initiative, which was creative and something that we didn't anticipate either. So I love being surprised by examples like that, where it's like you put something out there with an intent and actually people are using it in all kinds of creative ways. Currently, Headwaters Economics is on a team of people that are engaging with 60 Gulf Coast communities We're working with a set of university partners, and communities have signed up to participate in this project where they're using neighborhoods at risk to prioritize to assess stormwater vulnerability within their community and to prioritize improvements to their stormwater systems. I love that example because that's 60 communities that are all, coordinated in their use of these resources. So, I'll stop there, but that's a handful of, examples that come to mind.
Great, yes. And if any of you out there use the tool for something, we encourage you to let us know. You can either let me, I'll pass it on to Scott and Patty, or let them know directly. Okay, I think I have one more question before break, and then I think a couple of these, I can work on them during break. But I think Scott was starting to show this. So the US is set as the default place. Is there a way to select other places in the US for a direct comparison?
Ooh.
There isn't, but let me show you another tool really quick. I'm going to share my screen again. So if you go to our main webpage, which is headwaterseconomics.org, Patty, are you seeing our page?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And you go to the tools menu up here in the upper right-hand corner. You're going to see one of our most prominent tools, which is the economic profile system, presented at the top. Right below it is the one we're talking about, neighborhoods at risk. But if you click on EPS, you're going to see a splash screen, a selection screen. So let's go to Rochester again. Now you're going to see all of the reports that Headwaters can offer. We have demographic reports, populations at risk reports, reports on trends through time, reports that focus on natural hazards, reports that focus on land management, reports that focus on particular sectors of the economy. We made a decision to add the neighborhoods at risk report to this list. So it's under the natural hazards reports. And if you download it from this interface, so when I say no, you can't change the benchmark, you can't change it in neighborhoods at risk, but you can come to this page and you can click Rochester, and notice the download looks a little bit different. And now you could change this to be like, you can choose Metro. Oh, yeah, let's do Metro. Let's do New York Metro. So we could compare it to all counties in New York that are considered Metro. That's what New York Metro means. Or you could compare it to a particular county. And now
Or the state, or the whole state of New York.
Or the whole state, yeah. So now when you download the report, you also have an option to get the report when you do it from this interface as an Excel. In fact, by default, it will be Excel. Oops, it's opening on my other screen. Let me shunt it over here and make sure you guys can see it. Are you seeing this now, Patty and Jessica?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So here's the report. And now on the title page, the comparison location is going to say New York urban, right? And so if we go to the summary page, the comparisons now are between Rochester and New York Metro. If we go to any of the tables, the comparison is now between Rochester and New York Metro. So this can be the US, the state, a county, another state. It can be another, I think it can even be another city, Patty, is that right?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it can be city, county, state, metro, or non-metro portions of states. So yeah, and then, give us feedback if there needs to be more options for the download right from the neighborhoods at risk tool, including the ability to download the report as an Excel file. Give us that feedback, because the Excel file is really awesome if you want to grab tables or charts and put them into Word documents or put them into PowerPoint slides. That's a little harder to do out of a PDF. You can always grab a screen grab of it, but some people really do love the Excel file.
Excellent. And I think we got a question in the chat with that answer as well. Okay, so it's 2:05. I think now would be a good time for a quick 5-minute break. So if that sounds good to you both there, thumbs up. Okay.
Yeah, let's do that. And then when we get back, we'll have a really, I think it'll be a fun hands-on exercise. And for those that want to still hang around, Scott and I are, that exercise will probably only take us 10, 15 minutes. And Scott and I are more than happy to stay through the whole, 90-minute session if there's other questions.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll see everyone back here at 2:10. Okay, everybody, welcome back. I tried to answer some questions and realized one of them was probably a much longer discussion. So if you want to talk more about the differences between this tool and EPA's EJ screen, feel free to email me. So now I will hand it over to Scott and Patty for the exercise.
Awesome. All right, so I won't share my screen for this because what I'm gonna do is kind of test how well Scott and I did. So I'm gonna ask you to, in your browser, bring up neighborhoods at risk. If you Google neighborhoods at risk, Headwaters or Headwaters Economics, Google will take you right there. Or thanks, Jessica. We've got the link in the chat. All right, so go to the tool. And then we're all gonna do, I'm gonna ask you a series of questions and I'm gonna have you go dig for information. And we're just gonna use Albany County. So not the municipality. Go type in Albany County and bring that up. You'll get to the page where you see the map and the slider bars on the left. I'll give you a minute to get there. Okay, so hopefully most of you have managed to get there. So here's my first question for you. Here's your first quiz question. How many census tracts have a greater share of households with no car, households or housing units that are renters, and people who don't speak English that are greater than not the community median, but greater than the US average? So where each of those criteria, households with no car, housing units that are renters or rentals rather, and people who don't speak English, set all of those to the US average and tell me how many census tracts meet your criteria. And yeah, just drop it into the chat.
This one should be worth bonus points, Patty, because I'm realizing I failed to mention this.
I know, I caught that. I caught that you forgot to point out that feature.
Whoever can find this should get bonus points.
I'm seeing in the chat that some people managed to find that, and indeed, you're correct. Those of you that found it and put 4 census tracts, that's absolutely right. So what I'll do is share my screen for a quick moment and just show you where that feature is in case you're having trouble getting to that answer. All right, so let me share my screen. And I've got it over here. Okay, all right. So at page load, what we're seeing are those top 3 characteristics, but they're set to the community, or rather the county median. So on average, this county, 8.2% of households across the entire county have no car. But up here, you can set your criteria to the US average rather than the county's median. So when I clicked on that, now we see that the United States has 36% of housing units across the entire country that are rentals. That's why that criteria is set then to 36 when you clicked on the US average. And indeed, once we clicked on that button, we see that there are 4 census tracts within Albany County where these criteria, each one is above the US average. All right, so here's your next quiz question. All right, so what is the total population of the selected census tracts, the ones that meet those criteria, and additionally have more than 50% of their area that is impervious surface? So we're looking for the total population, but you have to add a criteria first. You keep the criteria that you had, and I'm also looking for an additional criteria of more than 50% of the land area is impervious surface. So I want to know the total population. You're very fast. That's why I knew this exercise wouldn't go for so long. This has been my experience. People like know right where to find things, which is awesome. So that's right. So in the chat, we have people dropping in. We've got about 10,000 people, 10,017 people. Once you add that additional criteria of lots of impervious surface. So I'll share my screen super quickly in case you didn't get there. Oh, okay. So suggestion, having a hard time reading the small gray type. So let me make my browser window bigger and see if the font is more legible for you. Okay, so I'm going to share super quick, and I will show you that when we add that additional, okay, let me make my browser bigger first. Okay, so when we add that new additional criteria of more than 50% of the land is impervious surface, we've gotten down from the 4 census tracts to now only 3, and I can come up to the table and see the characteristics of those combined 3 census tracts. All right. So then let me ask you, I've got 2 more quiz questions for you. All right, so the next one is this. Which among these census tracts, which of these tracts, and you can give me the name, which is tract blah blah, it's a number, which of these census tracts also has more than a quarter of the area of the tract that is in the 500-year floodplain? So you can type in the census tract number if you can figure out which of these meets all of those 4 criteria that we've got, but additionally has high flood risk. More than a quarter of the land is in the 500-year floodplain. Yep, you got it. It's tract 25. I won't share my screen for this one, but if you hover your mouse, you can do it. You can get to this 2 ways. You can either hover your mouse over each of the 3 tracts and just look at the statistic for in the table for the area of 500-year floodplain, and it's the tract most to the east, or you can set the slider bar and you're going to end up with only 1 census tract selected. Perfect. All right, here's your last question. This one is really tricky. So you know, maybe you can get there, or maybe I have to show you. We'll see. I'll be impressed if you can find it. For that one census tract, tract number 25, the easternmost one that meets all of these vulnerability criteria, what percent of the adult population has no high school degree? So for census tract 25, how many folks, what percent have no high school degree? And the hint is you got to download the report. As Scott was taking you through it, you might have seen that there is more detail in the report than we've surfaced in the web tool. So the question is, for tract 25, can you find in the report the percent of the population that has no high school degree? And I'm downloading the report myself. Yeah, and I see there's a little bit of confusion. People are figuring out.
Mhm.
Yep.
Correct.
So I'm impressed because many of you found it, but there was a little bit of confusion over which column of data. So, okay, let me share my screen just for this last quiz question, and I'll show you where to go. I'm going to start from scratch here. All right, here we go. Sharing my screen. And so I know that it's this census tract right here. I'm zooming in. This census tract right here that met all the criteria and has a high flood risk too, lots of area in the 500-year floodplain. So I'm going to get the report by clicking on that census tract and downloading the PDF report. So when I do that, the report is built on the fly with the latest available data, and I can go ahead and open that report. You see I've been downloading reports all morning. And all right, so I'm looking at the report, and here's my trick. I'm going to get the full page. All right, when I'm looking for something in these reports, I like to scroll to the table of contents and use these hot links to get me to where I need to be. And the question was to find how many or what share of the people that live in this single census tract do not have a high school degree. And as I look through the table of contents, I am assuming that that's going to be in a page on educational attainment. So I'm at that page on educational attainment, and the first answers that came in were, and this is a little confusing, the column that you see here is for the first column on this left, and it's also repeated in the bar chart, is for the community as a whole. So the selected census tract is the middle column. So yeah, and then the right-hand column, that comparison column, is the United States. So we actually have a nice cross comparison between the community as a whole, the one or more selected census tracts, and the nation. And indeed, there's about 23.5% of the 16,000 people that live in this census tract that don't have a high school degree, and that's repeated in this bar chart. And I'll just point out that that data has medium reliability because it's shown in orange. So I wouldn't use it at all if it was shown in red, but knowing that it's shown in orange, we can say, well, yeah, plus or minus some error, but it's different enough from the community as a whole and from the United States that I'm willing to say, wow, okay, this census tract is quite unique in how many people have not been able to graduate from high school. So I will stop sharing my screen at this point. And I am very impressed. You are all paying attention and know how to get around not only the web tool, but also the report. So that's pretty awesome. Thank you. And I hope that you are able to use the tool. And I think, you know, Jessica, I'll kind of leave it to you whether we do like eval and wrap up or whether there's time for another question.
Yeah, I've put the link to the evaluation in the chat. I'm also going to email it after this. If you want to take that, that'd be super helpful. I know I have a question for you real quick. Is there any place on the website where people can supply feedback on the tool?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that we did that in the initial days. We had a form.
Mhm.
So what I would say is, please email Scott and myself. Our emails are long but easy to remember. I am just Patty, P-A-T-T-Y, at headwaterseconomics.org. And Scott is Scott at headwaterseconomics.org. Remember, it's a .org, not .com or .gov. But yeah, you can just feel free to lob us your questions or your thoughts on improvements. We love to hear from you.
There's also, Patty, does contact us, does that email to Kelly?
It does, yeah.
Yeah, so there's contact us buttons smattered all throughout, including in the upper right-hand corner of Neighborhoods at Risk, there's a little 3-bar menu, we call it the hamburger. And if you go to contact us, you'll get to a page with a fillable form.
Oh, I didn't even know that was there.
Yeah, I just looked it up to remind myself. That would end up in our associate director's inbox, and she would definitely bring it to our attention.
The cool thing about that is that she'll get it to the right person, you know, quickly. Whereas my inbox is madness. I do as good a job as I can muster. But yeah, Kelly's really, really amazingly organized and gets back to people.
Okay, great. I think we're getting a lot of really positive feedback in the chat. I know we had one person asked if you were hiring because you guys are pros at data visualization, obviously, and making things really useful. And I just want to thank you so much for being here today. We're really lucky to have Scott and Patty come here and give us some time. I just saw this question come in. New York Sea Grant did not develop this tool. Headwaters Economics, were you contracted through NOAA to develop this tool on the national scale?
Well, we brought a combo of funding. So charitable foundations have contributed, so philanthropy, people that want to advance climate resilience, and NOAA did contribute in a 1-year period some funding as well to the project. So we've cobbled together lots of pockets of funding, but importantly, we do have a New York connection because one of our original community partners was Buffalo, New York, and Cornell hosts and has supplied to us in a wonderful partnership the climate data that are served up in Neighborhoods at Risk.
Great. All right, I think I'm gonna leave it there. And yeah, just once again, thanks so much for being here, and thanks everybody for joining. And we look forward to keeping in touch about this.
Thanks everyone. We're really grateful that you took the time.